The blade glinted in the dim moonlight filtering through the window. Mira's trembling hand gripped the kitchen knife tightly, her knuckles white with tension. She stood over the sleeping form of her husband, the village chief, his wrinkled face peaceful in slumber. At just 17, Mira felt the weight of a lifetime of suffering on her shoulders. As she raised the knife, a single tear rolled down her cheek. This was her only way out. Mira awoke on her 17th birthday with a heart full of hope. The sun streamed through the gaps in the thatched roof of her family's modest home in the small village of Chandrapur, nestled in the heart of rural India. She stretched, a smile playing on her lips as she thought of Arjun, her secret boyfriend. They had plans to meet by the old banyan tree later that day, away from the prying eyes of the villagers. As she helped her mother prepare breakfast, Mira hummed a popular Bollywood tune, her mind filled with dreams of a future with Arjun. Little did she know that her world was about to come crashing down around her. "Mira, come here," her father called from the main room. His voice was gruff, tinged with an emotion she couldn't quite place. Wiping her hands on her worn salwar kameez, she made her way to where her father sat cross-legged on the floor, a grave expression on his weathered face. "Sit down, beta," he said, using the affectionate term for daughter. Mira's heart began to race. Something was wrong. Her father cleared his throat, avoiding her gaze. "The village chief Rajeshji has asked for your hand in marriage." Mira felt as if the ground had opened up beneath her. "But Baba," she stammered, "Rajeshji he's older than you." Her father's face hardened. "He is a respected man in our village. This marriage will bring honor to our family and ensure our security." Tears welled up in Mira's eyes. "But I don't want to marry him. I'm only 17. I want to finish school. I want—" "Enough!" her father thundered, silencing her protests. "The decision has been made. You will marry Rajeshji next month." As the reality of her situation sank in, Mira felt her dreams slipping away like sand through her fingers. How could she marry a man old enough to be her grandfather? What about her education, her aspirations? And Arjun? Oh, Arjun. Later that day, Mira snuck out to meet Arjun by their banyan tree. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying, her heart heavy with the burden of her impending fate. Arjun's face lit up when he saw her approach, but his smile quickly faded as he took in her distraught appearance. "Mira, what's wrong?" he asked, reaching for her hand. She collapsed into his arms, sobs racking her body. Between gasps, she told him about the arranged marriage to the village chief. Arjun held her tightly, his own world crumbling at the news. "We'll run away," he said fiercely. "We'll go to Mumbai. I have a cousin there. He can help us." Mira shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "They'll find us, Arjun. You know how these things work. The village will never let us be together." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the field, the young lovers clung to each other, their hearts breaking with the realization that their dreams of a future together were slipping away. The day of Mira's wedding dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the darkness that had settled in her heart. The village was abuzz with excitement, colorful decorations adorning every street corner. To the outsider, it might have seemed like a joyous occasion, but for Mira, it was the beginning of a nightmare. As she was dressed in a red and gold bridal lehenga, intricate henna designs adorning her hands and feet, Mira felt like a doll being prepared for display. Her mother fussed over her, adjusting her jewelry and wiping away the tears that silently rolled down her cheeks. "Don't cry, beta," her mother whispered, her own eyes glistening. "This is for the best. Rajeshji will take good care of you." Mira wanted to scream, to run away, but she knew it was futile. The weight of tradition and societal expectations bore down on her, suffocating any hope of escape. As she was led to the mandap, the wedding altar, Mira caught sight of Arjun in the crowd. Their eyes met for a brief moment, a lifetime of longing and regret passing between them. She saw the pain etched on his face, mirroring her own anguish. Rajesh, the 70-year-old village chief, stood waiting for her, a self-satisfied smile on his wrinkled face. As Mira took her place beside him, she felt a chill run down her spine. This man, old enough to be her grandfather, was to be her husband. The ceremony proceeded, a blur of Sanskrit chants and ritual gestures. Mira went through the motions mechanically, her mind far away, imagining a different life, a different wedding, with Arjun by her side. As the priest declared them husband and wife, Mira felt a part of herself die. She was no longer just Mira, the girl with dreams of education and love. She was now the wife of the village chief, a role she never wanted and a life she never chose. That night, as Mira was led to the bridal chamber in Rajesh's large house, fear gripped her heart. She had been raised in a conservative society, sheltered from discussions about marital intimacy. The thought of sharing a bed with this old man filled her with revulsion. Rajesh entered the room, his eyes roving over her young form with undisguised desire. "Come here, my young bride," he said, his voice thick with anticipation. Mira backed away, her heart pounding. "Please," she whispered, "I'm not ready." Rajesh's face darkened. "You are my wife now. It is your duty to please me." As he approached her, Mira felt trapped, cornered like a frightened animal. In that moment, she realized the true horror of her situation. This was to be her life now, night after night, year after year. Closing her eyes, Mira retreated into her mind, imagining herself far away from this room, from this village, from this life that had been thrust upon her. As Rajesh claimed his marital rights, Mira's spirit began to harden, a seed of rebellion taking root in her heart. The days following the wedding blurred into a monotonous routine of domestic servitude for Mira. She woke before dawn, her body aching from the previous night's unwanted intimacies, to begin her duties as the chief's wife. Her mornings were spent preparing elaborate breakfasts for Rajesh and tending to his every need. As she served him, Mira couldn't help but notice how his roomy eyes followed her every move, a constant reminder of her vulnerable position. "You're a good wife," Rajesh would often say, his gnarled hand patting her bottom possessively. "I chose well." Mira would force a smile, suppressing the urge to recoil from his touch. Inside, her revulsion grew with each passing day. The afternoons were filled with endless household chores, sweeping, mopping, washing clothes by hand in the courtyard. The other village women would often gather, their curious eyes and whispered comments a constant source of discomfort for Mira. "She's so young," they would murmur. "But the chief seems happy. She must be doing something right." Their words, meant as compliments, cut Mira to the core. Was this all she was now? A young body to satisfy an old man's desires? One afternoon, as Mira was hanging laundry to dry, she caught sight of a familiar figure walking down the street. Her heart skipped a beat. It was Arjun. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world around them faded away. Arjun's gaze was filled with a mixture of longing and sorrow. Mira felt a lump form in her throat, memories of their time together flooding back. Just then, she heard Rajesh's voice calling from inside the house. "Mira, where are you? I need you." The spell broken, Mira turned away from Arjun, hurrying back into the house. But that brief encounter had rekindled something within her, a reminder of the life she could have had, the love she had been forced to give up. As she attended to Rajesh's demands, Mira's mind raced. She couldn't continue like this. There had to be a way out, a chance at happiness. But how? As weeks turned into months, Mira's despair deepened. She lost weight, dark circles forming under her once bright eyes. The villagers began to notice, their whispers taking on a concerned tone. "The chief's young wife doesn't look well," they would say. "Perhaps the responsibilities are too much for her." Rajesh, however, remained oblivious to Mira's suffering. His demands on her time and body only increased, his possessiveness growing with each passing day. One evening, as Mira prepared dinner, she overheard a conversation between Rajesh and one of his friends. "You're a lucky man, Rajesh," the friend said. "Such a young, beautiful wife to warm your bed." Rajesh laughed, a sound that sent shivers down Mira's spine. "Indeed, my friend, and soon she'll give me the son I've always wanted. I'll be the envy of every man in the village." Mira's hand trembled, nearly dropping the pot she was holding. The thought of bearing this man's child, of being tied to him forever through a child, was more than she could bear. That night, as Rajesh slept beside her, his snores filling the room, Mira lay awake, tears silently streaming down her face. She thought of her lost dreams, of Arjun, of the life she could have had. It was in that moment, in the dark of night, that a dangerous thought began to form in Mira's mind. If there was no escape from this marriage and life, perhaps there was another way out. As the monsoon season approached, bringing with it the promise of rain and renewal, Mira found herself increasingly trapped in a cycle of despair. Her days were a blur of endless chores and unwanted intimacy, her nights filled with silent tears and desperate prayers for escape. It was during one of her rare moments of solitude, as she fetched water from the village well, that fate intervened. Lost in thought, Mira didn't notice the approaching figure until a familiar voice broke through her reverie. "Mira?" She looked up, her heart skipping a beat as she met Arjun's concerned gaze. He had grown thinner, his eyes carrying a sadness that mirrored her own. "Arjun," she whispered, glancing around nervously. "You shouldn't be here. If someone sees us—" "I had to see you," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I couldn't bear it any longer. How are you? Are you okay?" The simple question, asked with such genuine concern, broke something inside Mira. Before she could stop herself, she was pouring out her heart to Arjun, telling him of the daily humiliations, the fear, the crushing weight of her unwanted marriage. Arjun listened, his fists clenching in anger. "We have to do something," he said fiercely. "You can't go on like this. We could still run away." Mira shook her head, wiping away her tears. "You know we can't. They would find us, and the consequences. I couldn't bear it if anything happened to you because of me." As they spoke, huddled close by the well, neither noticed the village gossip, old Mrs. Sharma, watching from afar, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. The following day, as Mira was preparing lunch, Rajesh stormed into the kitchen, his face contorted with rage. Without warning, he struck her across the face, sending her stumbling against the stove. "You shameless whore," he roared. "Meeting your lover behind my back." Mira's mind raced. How had he found out? Then she remembered Mrs. Sharma's prying eyes at the well. Of course, the old gossip couldn't wait to report to the chief. "It's not what you think," Mira pleaded, her cheeks stinging from the blow. "We were just talking." "Silence," Rajesh thundered. "You are my wife, your body, your thoughts, everything belongs to me. I'll teach you the price of defiance." What followed was a night of brutality that Mira would never forget. Rajesh's anger manifested in physical and sexual violence, leaving Mira battered and broken, both in body and spirit. As she lay curled up on the floor of their bedroom, her body aching and her soul shattered, Mira realized that her situation was even more desperate than she had imagined. There would be no mercy, no understanding, no escape within the confines of this marriage. In the days that followed, Mira moved through her duties like a ghost, her eyes vacant, her movements mechanical. The villagers whispered among themselves, noting the bruises that Mira futilely tried to hide. "The chief must have a heavy hand," they murmured. "But it's a wife's duty to bear it. She'll learn." Their callous acceptance of her suffering only fueled the growing rage within Mira. She began to see the village, with its rigid traditions and oppressive patriarchy, as a prison. And Rajesh, with his cruel dominance and lustful entitlement, was her jailer. One night, as Rajesh forced himself upon her once again, something inside Mira snapped. As she lay there, enduring his unwanted advances, her mind began to formulate a plan. A dangerous, desperate plan. She thought of the kitchen knife, sharp and gleaming. She thought of Rajesh's deep, snore-filled sleep. She thought of freedom. In that moment, Mira made a decision. She would no longer be a victim. She would take control of her destiny, no matter the cost. As Rajesh finished and rolled over, quickly falling into a drunken slumber, Mira stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. She knew what she had to do. It would be risky, potentially catastrophic if she failed. But in her mind, death, even imprisonment, seemed preferable to the life she was currently living. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow night, she would make her move. One way or another, her torment would end. The next day dawned like any other, but for Mira, everything had changed. As she went about her daily chores, her mind was focused on the task ahead. Every movement, every interaction was infused with a new purpose. She took extra care in preparing Rajesh's favorite dishes for dinner, adding a generous amount of his preferred spices. "You're in a good mood today," Rajesh commented, eyeing her suspiciously. Mira forced a smile. "I just want to please you, husband," she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. As evening approached, Mira made sure to keep Rajesh's cup filled with strong homebrewed liquor. She watched with a mixture of disgust and anticipation as he became increasingly inebriated, his speech slurring and his movements clumsy. "You're such a good wife," Rajesh slurred, pawing at her as she helped him to bed. "I knew I made the right choice." Mira said nothing, her heart pounding as she waited for him to fall asleep. Soon, his loud snores filled the room, signaling that he was in a deep, alcohol-induced slumber. With trembling hands, Mira crept to the kitchen. The house was silent, save for Rajesh's snores and the distant sounds of night creatures. She reached for the drawer where she kept the sharpest kitchen knife, her fingers closing around the wooden handle. As she made her way back to the bedroom, knife clutched tightly in her hand, Mira's mind raced. Was she really going to do this? Could she live with herself afterward? But then she thought of the alternative. Years of abuse, of being nothing more than a possession, of watching her youth and dreams wither away in this gilded cage. She stood over Rajesh's sleeping form, the knife glinting in the moonlight streaming through the window. Her husband, her tormentor, lay there, vulnerable and unaware. All it would take was one swift motion, one moment of courage, and she could be free. Mira raised the knife, her hand shaking. She closed her eyes, steeling herself for what she was about to do. In her mind, she saw flashes of her life, her childhood dreams, her love for Arjun, the horror of her wedding night, the daily humiliations and abuse. Just as she was about to bring the knife down, a sound from outside startled her. The knife slipped from her grasp, clattering to the floor. Rajesh stirred, mumbling in his sleep. Panic gripped Mira. She quickly retrieved the knife and rushed back to the kitchen, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure it would wake the entire village. She returned the knife to its drawer, her mind reeling from what she had almost done. As she slumped to the kitchen floor, tears streaming down her face, Mira realized she couldn't go through with it. Despite everything, she couldn't bring herself to take a life, even the life of the man who had caused her so much pain. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, Mira made a new resolution. She couldn't kill Rajesh, but she also couldn't continue living this way. There had to be another solution, another way out. With a newfound determination, Mira began to plan. She would find a way to escape, to start a new life far from this village and its oppressive traditions. It would be difficult, dangerous even, but it was her only hope for a future of her own choosing. As Rajesh's snores continued to echo from the bedroom, Mira felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in months. She didn't know exactly how she would do it, but she knew one thing for certain. Her days as a submissive, abused wife were numbered. In the days that followed her aborted attempt to end Rajesh's life, Mira's mind worked overtime, formulating a plan for escape. She knew she couldn't stay in the village. Even if she managed to leave Rajesh, the societal pressures and stigma would be unbearable. No, she needed to get far away, to a place where she could start anew. Mira began to secretly gather resources. She squirreled away small amounts of money from the household budget, hiding the coins in a small pouch sewn into the lining of her oldest sari. She also started collecting information, eavesdropping on conversations about the big cities, Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, places where a young woman might be able to disappear and build a new life. But Mira knew she couldn't do this alone. She needed help, and there was only one person she could trust. On a humid afternoon, when Rajesh was away at a village council meeting, Mira snuck out to the old banyan tree, her and Arjun's special meeting place. Her heart raced as she saw him approach, his face lighting up at the sight of her. "Arjun," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need your help." She told him everything, the abuse, the despair, her failed attempt to end it all, and now her plan to escape. Arjun listened, his face a mixture of anger, sorrow, and determination. "I'll do anything to help you, Mira," he said, taking her hands in his. "But are you sure about this? It's going to be dangerous." Mira nodded, her eyes filled with a fire that Arjun hadn't seen in months. "I'm sure. I'd rather die trying to be free than live another day in that house." Together, they refined the plan. Arjun had a cousin in Mumbai who might be able to help Mira find work and a place to stay. He would arrange for transportation and provide her with some additional money for the journey. As they parted, Arjun pulled Mira close, kissing her forehead gently. "Be careful," he whispered. "And remember, I love you." I always have, and I always will. Mira felt tears welling up in her eyes. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself to feel hope. 2 weeks later, everything was in place. Mira had packed a small bag with essentials, hiding it in a corner of the storage room. She had memorized the bus schedules and the route she would need to take to reach the highway where Arjun would be waiting with a borrowed motorcycle. On the chosen night, Mira went about her usual routine, serving Rajesh his dinner and evening drinks. She had added a little extra to his liquor, ensuring he would sleep deeply. As Rajesh's snores filled the house, Mira's heart pounded. This was it. There would be no turning back after this moment. With trembling hands, she retrieved her hidden bag and the money she had saved. She took one last look around the house that had been her prison for the past year, feeling a mix of fear and exhilaration. Just as she was about to step out the door, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. Rajesh's voice, slurred but unmistakable. "Mira, where are you going?" She turned to see Rajesh standing in the bedroom doorway, swaying slightly, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. At that moment, time seemed to stand still. Mira knew she had a choice to make: stay and face the consequences of her attempted escape, or run and never look back. With a deep breath, Mira made her decision. She bolted for the door, ignoring Rajesh's angry shouts behind her. As she ran through the darkened village streets, her heart pounding in her ears, Mira could hear Rajesh's enraged voice fading into the distance. She ran faster than she ever had before, driven by the desperate need for freedom. Finally, she reached the highway where Arjun was waiting, his face etched with worry. Without a word, she jumped onto the back of the motorcycle, clinging tightly to Arjun as they sped off into the night. As the wind whipped through her hair and the lights of the village faded behind them, Mira felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt alive. The journey to Mumbai was a blur of anxiety and excitement for Mira. Every passing car, every police checkpoint made her heart race, fearing that Rajesh or someone from the village might have raised an alarm. But Arjun's steady presence and the increasing distance from her old life gradually eased her fears. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, they reached the outskirts of Mumbai. The sheer size and energy of the city overwhelmed Mira. Towering buildings, bustling streets, and a sea of unfamiliar faces. It was a world away from the small village she had left behind. Arjun drove them to a modest apartment building in a working-class neighborhood. "This is where my cousin lives," he explained. "He's expecting you." As they stood outside the building, the reality of their situation hit them both. This was goodbye. "I wish I could stay with you," Arjun said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I have to go back. If I disappear too, they'll know I helped you. This way I can try to mislead them, give you more time to settle in." Mira nodded, tears streaming down her face. She knew he was right, but the thought of facing this new world alone terrified her. "Thank you," she whispered, embracing him tightly, "for everything." With one last lingering look, Arjun got back on his motorcycle and drove away, taking a piece of Mira's heart with him. Arjun's cousin, Rahul, turned out to be a kind-hearted man who welcomed Mira without judgment. He helped her find a job as a salesgirl in a small clothing store and showed her how to navigate the complexities of city life. The first few weeks were challenging. Mira struggled with the fast pace of the city, the unfamiliar work, and the constant fear of being discovered. But slowly, she began to adapt. She made friends with her coworkers, learned to use the local trains, and even started to enjoy the anonymity that the big city provided. One evening, as Mira sat by the window of her tiny rented room, watching the sun set over the Mumbai skyline, she reflected on how much her life had changed. The pain and trauma of her past were still there, a dull ache in her heart, but for the first time in years, she felt a sense of possibility. She thought of Arjun, hoping he was safe and wishing things could have been different for them. But she also knew that this journey was hers alone to make. She had escaped not just Rajesh and the village, but the suffocating expectations that had been placed on her since birth. Here, in this vast and different city, she was no one's wife, no one's property. She was just Mira, a young woman with dreams, fears, and the courage to forge her own path. Mira stood at the entrance of her small beauty salon, a proud smile on her face as she flipped the open sign. In the 5 years since her escape, she had worked tirelessly, saving every rupee she could. She had taken night classes, learning the skills of cosmetology and business management. And now, at last, she had her own place. As she prepared for her first customers of the day, Mira caught sight of her reflection in the mirror. Gone was the frightened, broken girl from the village. In her place stood a confident, independent woman. She still thought of Arjun sometimes, wondering what became of him. She had never reached out, fearing that any contact might lead Rajesh or the villagers to her. But she hoped he was happy, that he had found a way to live his own life on his own terms. As for Rajesh and the village, they felt like a distant nightmare, painful to remember, but no longer able to hurt her. She had read in a local newspaper that Rajesh had remarried, this time to a widow closer to his age. Mira hoped that meant he would leave young girls alone in the future. The bell above the door chimed, signaling her first customer of the day. Mira greeted the woman with a warm smile, ready to help her feel beautiful and confident. As she worked, Mira reflected on her journey. It hadn't been easy, and there were times when she had almost given up. But she had persevered, driven by the fierce determination that had given her the courage to escape in the first place. She hadn't killed Rajesh that night, but in a way, she had killed something else. The notion that she was powerless, that her life was not her own. In choosing to live, to fight for her freedom and her dreams, Mira had triumphed over the oppressive traditions that had nearly destroyed her. As the day went on, Mira's salon filled with the chatter and laughter of women, some seeking a new look, others simply enjoying a moment of pampering. In their faces, Mira saw reflections of herself, women with hopes, dreams, and the right to choose their own paths. She may not have taken a life, but Mira had given birth to something powerful, a new version of herself, and a beacon of hope for others who might find themselves in the situation she had escaped. As the sun began to set on another day in Mumbai, Mira looked out at the bustling street, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and purpose. She had survived, she had escaped, and now she was thriving. And in doing so, she had written her own story, one of resilience, courage, and the indomitable spirit of a woman who refused to be broken.